What happens when the world's most unpredictable billionaire sits down with late-night television's most notorious provocateur? What starts as a seemingly routine celebrity interview quickly spirals into television history's most shocking confrontation. Tonight, we're diving deep into the explosive exchange that left audiences speechless, producers scrambling, and one of the most powerful men in tech walking off, set in a rage that no one saw coming. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this is the kind of behind-the-scenes drama that Hollywood doesn't want you to know about. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show energy. Camera operators adjusted their angles, sound technicians ran final checks, and the audience settled into their seats, expecting another night of celebrity banter and scripted comedy bits. What they were about to witness would shatter every expectation of what late-night television could become. Elon Musk arrived at the studio that evening with his characteristic air of controlled chaos. Dressed in his typical understated black ensemble, he moved through the backstage area with the confident stride of someone who had reshaped entire industries on a whim. The production team had been briefing Jimmy Kimmel for weeks about this interview, knowing that hosting the Tesla and SpaceX CEO would require a delicate balance between entertainment and respect for one of the most influential figures of our time. Kimmel, known for his sharp wit and ability to make even the most serious guests laugh, had prepared what he thought would be a light-hearted conversation about electric vehicles, space exploration, and perhaps some gentle ribbing about Musk's social media presence. The host had built his career on finding the humor in everything, and he approached this interview with the same playful energy that had made him a household name. As the show's opening credits rolled and Kimmel delivered his monologue to the enthusiastic studio audience, Musk sat in the green room, scrolling through his phone with the intense focus that had become his trademark. Production assistants moved around him nervously, offering water and makeup touch-ups, but he seemed completely absorbed in whatever was capturing his attention on the small screen. The first sign that something was different came when Kimmel introduced his guest. Usually, celebrities would emerge from behind the curtain with practiced smiles and rehearsed waves, playing up to the crowd's energy. But when Musk walked onto the stage, there was something noticeably different in his demeanor. His usual confident swagger had been replaced by something more intense, more focused, as if he was carrying the weight of some unspoken tension. Kimmel, ever the professional, launched into his standard welcome routine, thanking Musk for coming on the show and making a few light jokes about the billionaire's various ventures. The audience laughed on cue, and for a moment it seemed like any other celebrity interview. But those who knew Musk well could see the subtle signs that this wasn't going to be a typical appearance. As they settled into their chairs, Kimmel began with what seemed like an innocuous question about the latest Tesla models, expecting the kind of enthusiastic response that Musk was known for when discussing his companies. Instead, he received a measured, almost cautious answer that lacked the passionate energy that usually characterized the entrepreneur's public appearances. The conversation continued for several minutes in this oddly restrained manner, with Kimmel trying to inject his usual humor, while Musk responded with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to the casual nature of the questions. The studio audience, sensing something unusual in the dynamic between host and guest, began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. It was when Kimmel made what he intended as a harmless joke about social media influence that the first real crack appeared in the facade of civility. Musk's response was sharp, cutting through the light-hearted atmosphere like a blade. The host, caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone, attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but it was already too late. The billionaire leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he fixed Kimmel with a stare that made the seasoned host visibly uncomfortable. What had started as a routine interview was rapidly transforming into something much more dangerous, and everyone in the studio could feel the tension building like electricity in the air before a storm. Kimmel, to his credit, tried to maintain his composure and keep the show moving forward, But Musk's responses were becoming increasingly pointed and confrontational. The careful media training that usually guided celebrity interviews had completely disappeared, replaced by a raw authenticity that was both captivating and terrifying to witness. The audience, initially confused by the shift in atmosphere, began to realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't scripted television drama or manufactured controversy for ratings. This was real conflict unfolding in real time, and the unpredictability of it held everyone in the studio completely transfixed. As the tension continued to escalate, production staff behind the cameras began exchanging worried glances. This wasn't how these interviews were supposed to go, and they could sense that their carefully planned show was spiraling beyond their control. The director, watching from the control room, had his finger poised over buttons that could cut to commercial at a moment's notice, but the compelling nature of what was unfolding made him hesitate. Kimmel, drawing on years of experience handling difficult guests and awkward situations, made another attempt to lighten the mood with a self-deprecating joke about his own social media struggles. But instead of the expected laughter and tension relief, Musk's response was even more intense than before, his voice carrying an edge that made it clear this was no longer a friendly conversation between television host and celebrity guest. The transformation was complete. What had begun as another routine late-night interview had become something entirely different, something that would be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. And this was just the beginning of what would become the most explosive confrontation in late-night television history. The breaking point came when Kimmel, still trying to salvage what remained of his show's friendly atmosphere, made a comment about how social media had changed the way public figures communicate with their audiences. What he intended as an observation about modern celebrity culture, Musk interpreted as something far more personal and threatening. Musk's response cut through the studio like a lightning bolt. His voice, which had been growing steadily more intense throughout the interview, suddenly exploded with a fury that shocked everyone present. He accused Kimmel of being part of a media establishment that deliberately misrepresented innovators and entrepreneurs, claiming that late-night comedy shows had become weapons of character assassination disguised as entertainment. The studio audience, completely unprepared for this level of raw conflict, fell into stunned silence. The usual rhythm of interview, joke, laughter, and applause had been shattered, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that seemed to fill every corner of the building. Camera operators, trained to capture every moment of television magic, found themselves documenting something far more intense and unpredictable than anything in their experience. Kimmel, his face flushing red with a mixture of embarrassment and anger, fired back with his own accusations. He challenged Musk's criticism, pointing out that comedy shows had always poked fun at public figures, and that being in the spotlight meant accepting a certain level of satirical treatment. His voice carried the defensive edge of someone whose professional integrity had been questioned on his own stage, in front of his own audience. But Musk wasn't finished. He launched into a blistering monologue about media responsibility and the power that entertainment figures wielded over public opinion. His words came rapid fire, each sentence building on the last in a crescendo of frustration that had clearly been building for much longer than this single interview. He spoke about how comedy shows shaped narratives, how they influenced elections, how they destroyed careers and reputations with clever editing and selective quotes. The billionaire's passion was undeniable, but so was his anger. He gestured emphatically as he spoke, his usual controlled demeanor completely abandoned in favor of raw, unfiltered emotion. Every person in the studio could feel the intensity radiating from him like heat from a furnace, and the uncomfortable silence from the audience only seemed to fuel his determination to make his point. Kimmel, realizing that his usual arsenal of jokes and deflection wasn't going to work in this situation, decided to meet fire with fire. He challenged Musk directly, questioning whether someone who had used social media to manipulate stock prices and attack critics had any right to lecture others about media responsibility. The host's voice carried a sharp edge that his regular viewers had rarely heard, revealing a side of his personality that usually remained hidden behind carefully crafted comedy routines. The exchange that followed was unlike anything ever broadcast on late-night television. Two powerful men, each convinced of their own righteousness, engaged in a verbal battle that grew more intense with each passing moment. Musk accused Kimmel of cowardice, of hiding behind humor to avoid real conversations about important issues. Kimmel countered by questioning Musk's motives, suggesting that the billionaire's anger stemmed from his inability to control narratives the way he controlled his companies. Production staff watching from behind the cameras found themselves frozen between their duty to capture everything and their instinct to intervene before the situation spiraled completely out of control. The show's producers, monitoring from the control room, debated frantically about whether to cut to commercial, but the compelling nature of the confrontation made them hesitate. This was television history unfolding in real time, and despite the chaos, they recognized the significance of what they were witnessing. The argument reached new heights when Musk began questioning the very foundations of late-night comedy, arguing that shows like Kimmel's had become propaganda machines that influenced public opinion while hiding behind the shield of entertainment. He spoke about the responsibility that came with reaching millions of viewers every night, and how that responsibility was being abdicated in favor of cheap laughs and political point-scoring. Kimmel's response was equally passionate. He defended not just his own show, but the entire tradition of satirical comedy, arguing that humor had always been a way for society to examine and critique those in power. He pointed out that Musk himself had built his public persona through media appearances and social media engagement, and that criticism was simply part of the price of fame and influence. The back and forth continued to escalate, with both men raising their voices and speaking over each other in their determination to make their points heard. The carefully controlled environment of a television studio had transformed into something resembling a courtroom or political debate, with each participant convinced that they were fighting for something much larger than personal pride. Audience members began looking around nervously, unsure whether they should continue watching or quietly leave. Some pulled out their phones to record what they were witnessing, sensing that they were present for something that would be talked about for years to come. The energy in the room had become electric, charged with the kind of tension that made everyone present acutely aware that they were witnessing something unprecedented. The confrontation took another dramatic turn when Musk began questioning Kimmel's knowledge of the industries and technologies that he regularly mocked in his monologues. He challenged the host to explain basic concepts about electric vehicles, space exploration, and artificial intelligence, suggesting that comedy about things you don't understand was just another form of ignorance disguised as wit. Kimmel, clearly frustrated by what he saw as condescending behavior, responded with his own challenges about Musk's understanding of entertainment, media, and the role of comedy in society. The two men were no longer having a conversation. They were engaged in a battle of intellects and egos that showed no signs of resolution. The studio cameras captured every moment of this extraordinary confrontation, from the subtle changes in body language to the increasing intensity in both men's voices. What had started as a routine celebrity interview had become a masterclass in conflict, a real-time demonstration of what happens when two strong-willed individuals with completely different worldviews collide in a public forum. As the argument continued to build toward what everyone sensed would be an explosive climax, the tension in the studio became almost unbearable. Staff members held their breath, audience members sat in stunned silence, and millions of viewers at home watched in fascination as two of the most recognizable figures in their respective fields engaged in a battle that would define both of their legacies. The moment that would become the most replayed clip in late-night television history began with a single question that shattered any remaining pretense of civility. Kimmel, his patience finally exhausted by what he perceived as Musk's arrogant Lecturing, looked directly into the billionaire's eyes and asked whether someone who had made billions by selling dreams to investors had any right to question anyone else's integrity. The question hung in the air like a lit fuse, and everyone in the studio seemed to sense that something irreversible was about to happen. Musk's face transformed completely, his usual controlled expression replaced by something far more dangerous. The calculated public persona that he had cultivated over years of media appearances disappeared entirely, revealing a raw intensity that few people had ever witnessed. His response came not in words, but in action. Musk stood up from his chair, with such sudden force that it rolled backward several feet, the sound of its wheels against the studio floor echoing through the stunned silence. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, he towered over Kimmel, his tall frame casting a shadow across the host's desk, while his eyes blazed with a fury that made everyone present acutely uncomfortable. When Musk finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but carried a menace that was far more frightening than any shouting could have been. He told Kimmel that he had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, that the host had revealed himself to be exactly the kind of person who destroyed innovation and progress for the sake of cheap entertainment. His words were measured and deliberate, each one carefully chosen for maximum impact. Kimmel, to his credit, refused to back down despite the obvious intimidation. He remained seated, looking up at the billionaire standing over him, and challenged Musk to explain exactly what line had been crossed. The host's voice shook slightly, whether from anger or nervousness wasn't clear, but his determination to stand his ground was unmistakable. He pointed out that tough questions were part of any serious interview, and that if Musk couldn't handle criticism, perhaps he shouldn't appear on talk shows. The billionaire's response was swift and devastating. He accused Kimmel of being a puppet, of corporate interests, someone who attacked innovators while protecting the established order that kept real progress from happening. He spoke about how entertainment figures like Kimmel served as gatekeepers, deciding which ideas and which people deserved public support, and which deserved ridicule and destruction. The audience watched in horrified fascination as the confrontation reached levels of personal animosity that went far beyond professional disagreement. This was no longer about different perspectives on media responsibility or the role of comedy in society. This had become deeply personal, with both men attacking not just each other's positions, but their character, their motives, and their right to hold the influence they wielded. Kimmel stood up from behind his desk, unwilling to remain in a position where Musk could loom over him. The two men now faced each other across the small space of the interview area, their body language aggressive and confrontational. The carefully designed set, meant to create an atmosphere of friendly conversation, had become an arena for a battle that neither man seemed willing to lose. The host fired back with accusations of his own, questioning whether Musk's anger stemmed from his inability to control the narrative the way he controlled his companies. He suggested that the billionaire's fury came from encountering someone who wouldn't be intimidated by wealth or influence, someone who would ask the hard questions that sycophantic interviewers usually avoided. Musk's response was to laugh, but it was a sound completely devoid of humor. He told Kimmel that he had vastly overestimated his own importance, that late-night comedy shows were becoming irrelevant in a world where people could get information and entertainment directly from creators and innovators. He suggested that hosts like Kimmel were dinosaurs, desperately clinging to a dying medium while the world moved past them. The insult hit its mark, and Kimmel's professional composure finally cracked completely. He began shouting, his voice echoing through the studio as he accused Musk of being a narcissist who couldn't handle any form of criticism or accountability. The host's face was flushed red with anger, and his usual carefully modulated television voice had been replaced by something raw and genuine. But Musk had already made his decision. While Kimmel continued his tirade, the billionaire calmly removed his wireless microphone and placed it on the host's desk with deliberate precision. The small action somehow carried more weight than all the shouting that had preceded it. a gesture of dismissal that spoke louder than any words could have. The studio fell into absolute silence as Musk turned his back on the still ranting host and began walking toward the exit. His movements were measured and purposeful, each step carrying him further away from the chaos he was leaving behind. Camera operators, unsure whether to follow him or remain focused on Kimmel, created a moment of visual confusion that perfectly captured the unprecedented nature of what was happening. Kimmel, realizing that his guest was actually leaving, called out after him with a mixture of anger and desperation. He demanded that Musk return to finish the interview, accused him of cowardice, and suggested that walking away proved everything that had been said about his inability to handle criticism. But the billionaire never turned around, never acknowledged. The host's words never showed any sign that he was even listening. The walk from the interview area to the studio exit took less than 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity to everyone watching. Audience members sat in stunned silence, production staff stood frozen at their posts, and millions of viewers at home watched in disbelief as one of the most powerful men in the world simply walked away from one of television's biggest stages. As Musk reached the exit, he paused for just a moment and looked back at the chaos he was leaving behind. Kimmel was still standing behind his desk, his face red with anger and embarrassment, while the studio audience sat in uncomfortable silence. The billionaire's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that suggested this was exactly how he had expected the evening to end. Then he was gone, disappearing behind the curtain and leaving behind a studio full of people trying to process what they had just witnessed. The cameras continued rolling, capturing Kimmel's attempt to regain his composure and salvage what remained of his show, but everyone knew that the real story had just walked out the door. The aftermath in the studio was chaotic, with producers rushing to figure out how to fill the remaining time, audience members talking among themselves in hushed, excited tones, and staff members already pulling out their phones to text friends and family about what they had just seen. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This was television history, and everyone present knew they had witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come. What started as a routine late-night appearance had become the most explosive confrontation in television history, a battle of egos and ideologies that revealed the true personalities behind two of the most recognizable figures in American culture. The carefully constructed world of celebrity interviews and scripted entertainment had been shattered by 30 minutes of raw, unfiltered conflict that showed what happened when media training met genuine anger. So what did you think of this? Incredible confrontation? Have you ever seen anything like this level of tension on live television? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories that reveal the truth about what really happens when the cameras are rolling.